Ryan Nobles is the correspondent, Washington correspondent for CNN, who's on the line here now. Good morning, Ryan.
I'm hungry now after that segment, Bill. I haven't had breakfast yet.
Beth, you ought to smell what's in here. It's delicious.
It's good.
Smelling. Okay, so the drama, the saga, it all continues. What do you want to start with? Let's talk about Russia, surveillance. What's going on? What do we know?
Well, we've talked about this time and time again, Bill, but, this week could theoretically be the biggest week in Donald Trump's presidency. He will more than likely get his Supreme Court nominee confirmed. He has an enormous summit with the president of China that's going to happen later this week in South Florida. He's bringing through a host of Middle Eastern leaders. He met with the leader of Egypt yesterday. He's meeting with King Abdullah of Jordan today. So, all this stuff, though, pales in comparison to the headlines that continue to dog him about the investigation into Russia. Now they have thrown this curveball having to do with Susan Rice and potentially her role in unmasking some members of the Trump team during the campaign. And, if you're the average American, you're just sitting there with your head spinning, wondering what to believe and what not to believe.
Yeah.
But regardless, it's making it very difficult for the president to get his agenda moving forward.
Yeah, you're right. It is so hard to you really have to do a little research. Just really kind of get in. And even now, you don't know what's true. No one is really, no one's coming out. You're getting little leaks here and there about the investigation, but it's hard to really determine what is true, what isn't true. I'm curious to know your opinion on, you're going to use the nuclear option, which means Congress is going to, the Senate's going to vote to change the rules and allow for just 51, a majority vote in order to confirm the Supreme Court nominee. So my question for you is who's going to win this one? Who wins, or is it basically just falling on partisan lines?
It's 100% falling on partisan lines. We knew from the second that Neil Gorsuch was nominated by the president that the Republicans were going to do whatever they could to get him confirmed, and even if that meant that he wasn't going to meet the 60-vote threshold. And essentially, the Democrats have one chip to play in this, and this is to basically do a public relations show with the filibuster, to have some grand demonstration of their opposition to him as a candidate. Both New York senators, for instance, Gillibrand and Schumer, are opposed to Gorsuch's nomination. A lot of it stems from their being upset with Merrick Garland not even getting the opportunity to get a hearing, much less a vote, after President Obama nominated him towards the end of his presidency. But, I think the big problem with this bill is that you've got somebody like Gorsuch, who I'm sure is conservative, but universally considered to be a smart, well-educated man, properly fit for the role of Supreme Court justice. And Democrats have now positioned themselves where you're taking someone like him, and they're just defining him as being extreme.
Right.
And so the ball and the standard by which we describe someone as extreme continues to move to the point where there really is no middle anymore. You're either extreme on one side or extreme on the other side, which is kind of indicative of our partisan politics. And right now, the situation on the Supreme Court is that Gorsuch is going to replace Scalia. You essentially are going to have the same makeup of the court in terms of conservatives. What happens if a liberal jurist ends up leaving the court during Donald Trump's administration? Then what type of judge could he potentially put in that spot? And then what will the Democrats say if he appoints someone maybe even more conservative? How are they going to be able to make that same cogent argument? It's just, I think overall it shows us a lack of any of these guys being able to come to consensus on anything in Washington right now.
Well, you go back to, 1991 when Clarence Thomas was confirmed. They didn't have to use this nuclear option. And that was a disaster. That whole thing was a disaster, if you remember that.
Clarence Thomas's nomination process was perhaps one of the most controversial nomination processes in the history of the Supreme Court. But much like that period of time, you were in a situation where Republicans were in control of everything. And, they had the hearings, they adjudicated the situation with he and Anita Hill, and there's people that still have opinions about it one way or another.
Yep.
But at the end of the day, elections matter. The Republicans had won that election, so the Republicans got to pick the Supreme Court nominee.
Yeah. And some Democrats they got to 60 there. I'm pretty sure they did.
Right, because at that point, we weren't in such a hyper-partisan posture in Washington where, Democrats and Republicans could recognize when the other side had won, there's opportunity for compromise, but ultimately, at the end of the day, they get to make this decision.
Yeah.
And you can be as mad as you want about Merrick Garland, and I do believe there are an argument to be made that he was treated unfairly.
Yeah.
But the Republicans took a huge gamble. They said, we're not going to confirm this guy, and we're going to see what happens in the election. That gamble turned out to be the correct one, and now they're the ones that get to pick the Supreme Court nominee.
Right.
So I think it's a lot of theater that I don't think at the end of the day really helps Democrats that much. But what it shows us is that Democrats view this president as being wounded, and they do not want to give him any inch. And so if you're Kirsten Gillibrand, for instance, who there's a big piece on her this week in the New York Magazine about how she may be one of the top contenders for 2020, she wants to make it clear on the record every day of her time in the Senate that she's opposed Donald Trump. And this is just another example of that. Yeah,
I think that this is all about it's all about the midterm elections, really, or 4 years down the road. It's just crazy, which means nothing gets done the way it normally would be done, right? There's no.
Well, if you can't, extrapolate this out. If you can't come to a consensus, and not even a consensus, you can't get 8 Democrats to say, this guy, Neil Gorsuch, is smart and capable, and yes, he's conservative, but he's replacing a conservative judge. And this isn't even voting for his confirmation.
Right.
This is just, voting to allow, to not filibuster, to allow the vote to get to that final stage. If you can't get 8 Democrats to do that, how on earth are you going to get 8 Democrats to come up with some sort of reform of Obamacare? That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
How are you going to come up, the president wants to do this massive infrastructure project. You are not going to get an infrastructure project passed without Democratic support because hardline conservatives are going to be opposed to any further government spending that's going to increase the deficit, which is necessary. Yeah. So if you can't get this done, how are you going to get those other things done? And what does that tell us about the next, 3 years and change of this administration and how difficult it's going to be for him to get anything done? Bill, if you look back historically, the most productive periods of time in presidencies are in the first 200 days.
Right.
We're almost 80 days into the Trump presidency. He doesn't have one major legislative accomplishment. What's going to happen after we get to this point where they start to entrench themselves, prepare for the midterms? It could make things very difficult for the next couple of years.
Well, he's going to get this done, and it's because all Republicans are on board here. But they got to change the rules in order to get it done. Legislation is a different animal. It's going to be. It's not going to be the same way. And you're right. How do you get stuff done? And there's that rift between conservatives and everybody else in the Republican Party.
Yeah, it's one thing to get Democrats on board. At this point, they can't even get Republicans on board. The Republican Party itself is so fractured. You have, Republicans from all sections of the ideological spectrum. Some are not going to give an inch on Obamacare.
Yeah.
Some are ready to make a deal. If you can't even get Republicans on board, how are you going to get Democrats on board? It just makes it very difficult for him. And, it doesn't help at all that he has this situation with Russia, which I made this point on another radio show earlier this week. I think the thing about Russia is there is a very good chance, and your Twitter handle's probably going on fire right now, Bill, because people think we're hammering Donald Trump. But I would grant you that there is a very good chance that Donald Trump and his campaign had nothing to do with Russia, that Russia independently attempted to intervene in this election all by themselves. And maybe they tried to co-opt Trump officials, but there's a chance that Trump and his team had nothing to do with it.
Right.
The only way we are going to find that out definitively is if the president cooperates with a bipartisan investigation into this, and there is some sort of conclusion drawn at the end of it. And wouldn't his presidency be so much better off if he had a document signed by the House and Senate Intel committees, Republicans and Democrats, that said the following: yes, Russia tried to intervene, but no, Donald Trump and his team weren't involved. It would make his life so much easier, but he refuses to even go down that road.
Which, by the way, makes you ask the question, why?
Right.
Well, right? You got to ask why. And you wonder why everybody's asking why. Oh, the media's unfair. Everybody's unfair. No. The resistance is prompting the question, something else is going on. Why won't you cooperate?
Well, and I think, there is 2 answers to the question of why. The first would be that maybe his people were involved. But I think the bigger answer to that question, and the one that if you just see the way he responds to these questions about Russia is, I think Donald Trump has an inferiority complex. I think even he himself is surprised by the fact that he's president of the United States.
Yeah.
He is so concerned by any suggestion that his victory was not won legitimately. So even if he wasn't involved with the Russians, the fact that the Russians tried to intervene in the election and maybe had some modicum of success makes it appear that his presidency isn't legitimate. That's why even the best example of this is how upset he is about losing the popular vote, and how he threw out this factless claim that there was some sort of widespread voter fraud.
Yeah.
That's an indication of him, being somewhat emasculated, that he doesn't believe that he's afraid that people don't believe that he really won the election.
Mm-hmm.
So I almost believe that that's the bigger reason that he pushes back on this, more than the idea that his people may have been connected to Russia. But still, it still puts him in this terrible posture where he just can't get out from underneath this. And then, you throw the wiretap thing on top of it to complicate the whole situation. It just makes his life more difficult than it needs to be.
Pretty crazy. But on that psychological issue, you got to wonder what would prompt him to have to always one up or always win. Or, I mean, there's something that causes that. And
or at least the appearence of winning. He wants at least the appearance of winning.
It's
That's
crazy.
very important.
Right.
I mean, the best example of that, I know you're probably wrapping up here, Bill, but when he was at the prayer breakfast, and the night after Arnold Schwarzenegger was removed from The Apprentice, and he had to, at the prayer breakfast, ask everyone to pray for Arnold, just to remind everyone that he was a better host of The Apprentice than Arnold was.
Right.
Why is that necessary? You are president of the United States. Who cares who was the best host of The Apprentice? It matters so little.
How many times have you heard somebody say, you won? You won. You don't need to do this. But listen, here's an example of this. Here's audio example from yesterday. Listen to this.
Huge disadvantage, electoral college. It's very, very tough. They say almost impossible for a Republican to win. But I had the support of, I would say almost everybody in this room. We had tremendous support. No, we did.
Okay, now they're booing him. I mean, why do you need to brag like that?
It was 5 months ago.
Right.
November was 5 months ago.
It's April.
Yeah. They said you can't win 5 months ago.
Get over it, please.
I mean, the number of times that I've been in a room with Donald Trump, I don't think I can't remember the last time I was in a room with him where he didn't mention winning the election.
Yeah.
And overstating the volume of his victory and making sure everybody is reminded of the fact that he won. I mean, he's the person of all the people that may be the most concerned that his win wasn't legitimate. He might be the biggest offender of that because he has to keep
bringing it up,
and making you think that just so you know, I won this fair and square. And everybody's like, "You're the president. You were inaugurated. Everybody knows you won it fair and square. Just be the president now. Let's focus on that."
Crazy. Ryan Nobles, Washington correspondent, CNN. We appreciate it, Ryan. Thanks so much.
Thanks, guys. Have a good one.
Okay. Wow. What do you say? He won.
Yeah.
He did win. I know he did.